two sides afterwards. And then this last question, the obvious one: what reality on the ground makes the choices that this was going to happen anyway, regardless of how Truman or anybody else tried to bully the Soviet Union. Well, there's the numbers. I mean, and these numbers are in every textbook about European history. We get 90% influence. You get 10 in Romania. Greece. I mean, you get Romania. We more or less get Greece because of Aristotle and so forth. Bulgaria, Hungary, Yugoslavia are sort of split 50-50. I mean, there's no meaning to these numbers other than the fact that these negotiators are facing the reality on the ground. And what's the reality on the ground? The Soviet Union's got troops there anyway. And just like dismembering the Ottoman Empire under Ataturk's nose after World War I, it's not going to happen because Ataturk's going to fight back. There's no way you're going to do anything about Poland and Romania and Bulgaria anyway. So you may as well sort of accept that. And most of the people that are part of the negotiations realize that's true. That's exactly right. We're just going to have to live with it. This is part of the deal. And after all, they fought more than we did, a lot more than we did. And they deserve to have a buffer zone. And we'll just see what happens. With nothing much we can do about it. Even though Churchill will then create a lot of nonsense noise about pushing back the Iron Curtain. He didn't.
Austria is not on
fair enough.
It's occupied.
Yeah.
In '55. It's relevant now. Bringing it up. It's very relevant. Khrushchev accepts an agreement. Okay. Austria can be neutral. Our troops will leave. Everybody's troops will leave, but they can't join NATO.
Yeah. Sounds familiar. That's reasonable. I mean, that moves things forward, and it did move things forward. I mean, you have to have a honest broker on the other side for sure, and you have to on your side be honest. Whatever. Yeah, if you've ever seen The Third Man, there's a Russian big time. Not mentioned, but of course I'm going to have to think. Well, the main reason the Allies invade through Italy is it's easier than going into Normandy in '43. Even though Stalin was pissed. What the hell? I mean, we're doing all the fighting. When are you going into Normandy? And Roosevelt's pushing Churchill like crazy, saying, "Yeah, that's a fair question. When are we?" And Churchill, so the story goes, has it deeply in mind. I just want the Germans and Russians to kill each other. I mean, we're not going to do it. Let as many Russians die as possible. And finally, Roosevelt says, "Screw that. We're going into Normandy, regardless of what Churchill says. And Eisenhower, you're in charge." But you go, so that's the main reason, because it's going to be easier. But what's another reason? What are those? You have to be close up to read. Those little patchwork red spots. You can see the German swastikas at the end. But the red spots are partisan republics. Partisan republics. Partisan is a positive name in World War II. These are locally organized groups of people that said, "We're not surrendering. We go in the hills. We fight back. We cannot defeat Mussolini yet. We can't defeat Hitler, but we will fight. We will fight. We will fight." And universally, their ideology was very left. Most were communists. They weren't taking orders from Stalin, but they were communists, and they were going to win. Everyone knew they were going to win the post World War II election in all these Milan, Florence, and so forth. You go in there and say, "We need to kind of take care of business, wipe somebody." Same in Greece. Same thing in Greece. Even then, as you'll see, I think, yeah, it's in this even then, there's still the likelihood that communists will win. Well, they did. They won. They won elections in Rome a couple of times. I mean, they were not stopped. They were not connected to Soviet Union whatsoever. The French communists were. I mean, you've heard this from me. This is just horrible what happened. You got one cagey character and two have no idea what's going on characters. Truman has no idea what's going on. The guy standing behind him is Harry, not Harry Burns, Edwin Burns, something Burns, who's the Secretary of War State, Secretary of State, who is giving giving Truman telling Truman what to do, and Truman pretty much follows him. And the other guy, how come it's not Churchill? Churchill has lost the election. The war's over, and the great hero, who's got a statue in front of Parliament, has lost the election because the British people don't trust him to deliver what had been promised during the war: national health care, yada yada. Two wars in a row. Two wars. And they talk about a guy that's got armed forces, corporal. And this guy. In any case, the crappy stuff is going on. Truman knows he's got the atomic bomb. He won't. Several of his advisors say, "You've got to tell Stalin. You cannot go into the post-war period with this kind of secrecy stuff. He may be a slime ball, whatever, but you've got to. He's all we got. So let him know. Maybe gain some trust." Stalin knows that they got it because he's got spies in Alamogordo. Meanwhile, Stalin has been asked by the Japanese to arrange surrender, and Stalin won't do it because so the Japanese. There's no debate about it. The Japanese were ready to surrender. You didn't need to drop the bomb. Whether the Americans knew that or not is a fair question. In any case, so
Stalin wanted time to take exactly.
He wanted the time to take Japan. He was ready to do it and said, "I'll send my troops in there. If Americans may not, we'll invade. We want." And the day the atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, August 6th, the evening of August 5th, the U.S. Intercepts the message, translates it from Russian, saying we're going to invade next week. Stalin, the Russian troops are going to invade next week. We've got to end this, otherwise there'll be Soviet troops in Japan, and they're ours after World War II. They can't be the Soviet. And it's whatever. Why is he so cynical? The Nobel Peace Prize for Europe in 2022. I disagree with him. I disagree heartily. Say, yeah, everything you say is utterly true, but at least they did it, for Christ's sake. At least they went down this road, and it took some guts to do so. And it's not a done deal yet. Why is he sort of cynical about Europe ever getting the Nobel Peace Prize? Say, look, this is the continent on which two world wars came out of, and centuries of imperialism and crap around the world and so forth. The idea that they get the Nobel Peace Prize, but that's just sour grapes.
So is there a time when you let the book collapse? If he's trying to find silver lining, and he thinks this is silver lining. That this is an example of the hard way. He learned and did something radically different. Took one step towards a unity which he thinks ultimately
I'll finish the PowerPoint with that. Yeah, I mean, otherwise the species could easily not survive. Other species, bacteria will survive just fine. They'll repopulate the earth with whatever the next evolutionary thing is. Insects win. Why not? Insects Olympics would be incredible. I could be talking, jumping 8 feet, big deal. Watch a graph, whatever. World to Cold War, and the rest of the book, you know what the rest of the book's going to be about. It's going to be about America screwing it, but Road to the Cold War. I mean, if you had never read this stuff, these these wild characters, which still exist, of course, they're all over the planet. They're now more non-state actors than they are state actors. They can get more money from drug dealers and oil barons or whomever, I suppose, than they can get from nations. But these characters that know where the weak spots are. They know where the money is. They can deliver their unsavory characters, but when you need them, it's useful to have some around, like you will in Iran. But there is this problem, and this in red. You can't talk about promoting democracy, and on the other hand, like cozy up and even put in power some pretty horrible people without eventually, fairly quickly, actually losing credibility, which surely has happened for the West, and getting it back will be hard. And so the details along the way, mistakes that the British made, not understanding quite how badly things had gone for them and how the world had switched gears, and the West was not going to turn into a backward place, but certainly not going to run the show anymore. The Tripartite Treaty. I mean, what is forced upon Iran in 1942 when Soviet troops and British troops come in? The Shah, this whip, he's got no power whatsoever. He's a young guy anyway. He's insecure. He's vain. He's told, you're going to sign this deal. Britain, the United States, and Soviet Union are guaranteeing you this deal, so sign it. I mean, we're going to pretty much run the show in Iran, but you're kind of independent and sovereign, more or less to some degree. But don't forget, we're running the show. There's no way that, so Frank Van is going to say, that there's enough power in the West to pull this off for very much longer. And of course, it's over by 1970. And just imagine these somewhat proud military people that the Shah has trained to defend Iran, and in come the British and the Russians to take over the place, and you're out of a job, you're out of a career, you've let Iran down. The left-wing parties are pretty successful at creating anti-American protest, anti-British protest. This is right through the Cold War period, even though we think that Iran's on our side. This incredible character, this maybe had been someone that could have pulled off good stuff in Iran, maybe. He certainly seemed to be going in the right direction, but what? Who is this guy? He's not a military man. He's a scholar. He's a scholar, lawyer. He's a politician. He gives interesting speeches. He's well connected. He's put back in the parliament eventually yet again. He's going to promote this whole idea that we can be an independent country. We're going to nationalize the oil. We're going to throw the foreigners out. It's a line that has been going on in the non-Western world for a long, long time, since 1492. But the time has come now where it's probably going to have some success. And he's got a good argument. The British are getting way too much money out of Iranian oil than the Iranians are, and it's not just about oil; it's about lack of dignity. I'll go to the next slide. If you could download the PowerPoint that I sent out, you might want to cut and paste this thing. It's quite good. I just sort of bumped upon it. It's a list of 91 political entities Britain has lost since 1793 up to Hong Kong in 1997. And so there's this list of 91 places, and it's really quite interesting. I mean, the British Empire is just going to flat out say again. No, Iran was not. Iran was not part of the British. Quite correct. They're not. But Burma, I mean, you go through Burma, the Japanese have no trouble beating the British overnight, and then you have Bridge on the River Kwai. India is independent by 47. The British promised. They say, look, okay, we resisted, but if you stay loyal through World War II, we promise you independence after World War II. And to their credit, the British are true to their word. Palestine, the British are kicking shit out. They're being killed by terrorists on both sides. They say, we can't handle it. We're just leaving. And this is the best we can do. We'll divide it into Jews and Arabs, and we're out of here. Iraq, there's all sorts of anti-British protests in the 50s. In 1958, Iraq becomes independent. China, of course, mounts in 1959. East Europe, is British going to have no influence there because it's part of the Soviet Union. Africa, Ghana is the first to become independent. Zimbabwe is the last. That's an ugly story. A lot of these colonial places, they're still a mess. But at least it's their own mess. Egypt in 57, Suez Canal crisis. And then the whole focus of this chapter is on what goes on in Iran. And the United States is going to get involved. So what are 3 reasons the United States gets involved? We'll go there. Where is oil discovered besides Iran? Well, not a surprise. What are 3 reasons, according to Frank Appendix, the United States knows it's got to get involved in Iran? One, the British clearly can't take care of business there. They'll try to hang on to the Anglo-Iranian oil deal as long as they can, but they're heading toward retirement just to a large degree, although it's still hard for the British to admit it. Stalin is just the opposite. He's ready for expansion. Iran has always been Persia has always been a target for Russia. There's plenty more oil out there than Iran. There's plenty of in Arab territories. Iran is, you can't let Iran go and let that go too. There's all sorts of motivations to get involved. I mean, this is new to me. I never heard of the meeting between Roosevelt and Lord Halifax. They're just going to discuss the oil in this area, and the deal is made. The oil in Persia is yours. The oil in Kuwait and Iraq will split. The oil in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia is ours. Understood? And of course, the British couldn't possibly say no at this stage of the game. So it's more of the same, back to Portugal, Spain, back in 1494. Somebody else's wealth is being divided up by the West. The use. It can't go on forever. The U.S. is able to negotiate. Well, there's a map that's worth looking at just now. This is a map from these days. I mean, it is rather stunning who got lucky and who didn't. It's just plain dumb, stupid. But there's a lot of oil there. And the red is gas, the black is oil. I mean, look at Azerbaijan. I mean, look at all the natural gas and oil in the Caspian Sea. And Turkmenistan is sort of the most of all the, well, no, we're backward in Kyrgyzstan, probably not. But of these 5 stands, Turkmenistan was certainly pretty good in backwards. They're rich. They got natural gas up the wazoo, whereas Uzbekistan gets a little bit and doesn't show in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is loaded too. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan get all the stuff. Afghanistan's got no oil at all, but they got minerals. Yada yada. He's got a whole list of all the wealth of the Middle East. In any case, the U.S. does well after World War II, and is willing, because of all this oil, to offer much better oil concessions to whoever they need to get oil concessions from, whether it's the Bahrainis or the Saudis or the Iraqis or whomever. And so there's all this evidence out there that the West, at least the United States, is willing to give better oil concession deals than Britain is giving Iran. But Britain refuses to renegotiate. Why? Well, they just broke. But broke countries can still work their way out of it. But to work your way out of it, you've got to raise taxes on your citizens. And if you raise taxes on your citizens, you're out of power. So you can't, as a democracy, do that. Unless you're in the middle of a war, then you probably can. Britain is there. I remember my brother went to was a local university and went to was in Britain for a couple of quarters overseas. We met in summer '67, traveled together around Europe. And, he spent most of the time, not half the time. You know, Britain's screwed. They're really in a terrible position as far as debt goes and productivity. And to her credit, Margaret Thatcher did some necessary stuff. She did it in a nasty, nasty, nasty way, and did some really shitty stuff too. But some of that stuff did give Britain a little bit of a lifeline for a while. Whether you know it or not, the Europeans said, we won't even let you in the EU. They kept applying, said, we don't want you. You have not been a good European citizen. Finally, in '73, they were allowed in, but in '76, they're broke. They have to beg. This is by far at that stage the biggest IMF bailout, and it's not Argentina or Russia or Korea or whomever. It's the UK. They had to borrow a hell of a lot from the IMF. And what was the IMF? Whenever they loaned us money, able to demand from Britain, you got to cut public expenditure. You've got to raise tax. You've got to, and this is going to create a real. This will open the door to Margaret Thatcher. This is when she gets elected, because the IMF will force so much austerity on Britain, and the British say we can't stand this austerity. And say, yes, you can. Yes, you can. You want to go live in Costa Rica? We want to see how miserable it is in other parts of the planet. In any case, Britain, the belief was we cannot raise taxes, so we need the money, and we can't give in. So most of that becomes a major play. So when's he going to first? When's he first proposed nationalization? 1951. He's appointed by the Parliament Majlis, which exists. I mean, there's a functioning parliament in Iran, which sometimes does some pretty good stuff. What's the problem? Why don't they really rule? Who actually really rules? The Guardian Council. Who the hell is the Guardian Council? That's the mullahs. The mullahs, of course, are now so corrupt themselves. And what Iran's a corrupt place again. Whatever. In any case, they had a chance. So the support for nationalization inside of Iran, of course, is enormous. It's enormous because one, the Iranians are not getting anything close to a fair share of the profits of oil. And there's these horrible working conditions for Iranian workers. I mean, you can read them one by one. But they're living in terrible conditions. They're humiliated, yada, yada, yada. So nationalization occurs. The British will say, well, we're going to boycott. And we have the naval capacity to keep you from selling your oil. It doesn't work. What a surprise. It simply makes the Iranian resolve stronger. So Britain's got to go to Plan B, and everyone knows the Plan B. Most of that is on the cover of Time as the 1952 Man of the Year, not as a good guy, but as a bad guy. The oil, the wheels of chaos, and the editorial that goes with Time, but basically says to the U.S., hey, get rid of this guy. And there's a lot of talk about that. Meanwhile, there's other people. I listed a few. They're saying, he's actually saying some pretty good stuff. You should really. It's not a completely one-sided debate in the U.S. But Eisenhower's got a certain set of people that are running the show. When's the CIA created? Harry Truman creates it. It's not until 1947. There's the building in Langley, Virginia, just south of Washington, D.C. Big complex. Its first the first guy that's running it is a military guy. But by 1953, it'll be a guy named, what is it? Dulles. He's not that Dulles. They're the Dulles brothers. One is Secretary of State, one's running the CIA. In 1953, how convenient. Break fan, I didn't know. This is a great list. I love it. The track record of the CIA early on is terrible. They don't see Soviets taking over Romania, Czechoslovakia. Not that no anyone was going to do anything about it anyway. They didn't see the blockade of Berlin coming, so you got to make up a plan. They had not gotten that the Soviet Union was going to get the atom bomb by 49, and the nuke. They missed the mark a lot. Yeah, well, a lot. Yeah, They were successful, however, here we go, in turning the 1948 Italian elections in the right direction by sending $200 million to Catholics in Italy to say, you can't vote for the communists. They're atheists, and the communists were going to win the election. And to repeat, it's 100% agreed upon. The Italian communists, like the Greek communists, were utterly independent of Stalin. The French communists weren't. They were beholden to Stalin, but the French communists never had much power. And they were, had they won the election in 48, God knows what would have happened. Who's going to win this next election? I guess Italy's going to have elections in September. It's going to be basically a neo-fascist party. It's going to win all of the run by a woman and so forth. It's bad. Yeah, he probably is. Italy's in real trouble, despite the fact that there's plenty of wealth in it. You just got to get this. You just got to tap it. Whatever. So the CIA. The Americans hate the guy that's running Iraq because he won't give the U.S. the right to build a pipeline of oil across Saudi Arabia. He's sort of cozying up to the communists. So he's got to go, and the CIA is quite effective. The guys that were listed early on, Kermit Roosevelt, of bloodlessly getting rid of this president, this guy in Iraq. The second guy to go is the Project FF, which is what approved, is the very corrupt King Farouk of Egypt. Everyone knows he's corrupt. It's good to get rid of him. Of course, what you're going to get on the other side is Nasser. You think you got a good guy, but not switch things around, as we'll read about in the last 7 chapters. So Farouk has gone. The CIA has arranged that. They've gotten Iraq. So they're on kind of a roll now, even though they're making mistakes other places. So it's useful. They're going to be called in to help out in Iran as well. So you do the usual stuff. You bribe certain people to say, we'll pay you to do this and that. It's worth your while to be on our side. Who are the first people? Here's a staged mob out in front of Mossadegh's house in Iran. Which groups were bribed by the CIA early on? Some members of the security force, some influential clergy, crowds, so-called crowds that show up, and so the CIA, the British and the CIA stage coup is underway. How's it go? The first trial, crowds pour in the street, and they put most of it on their shoulders. They carry them around and say, "We won't let this happen." And what's the Shah do? He's out of the. He doesn't even put his socks on. He's on the way to Rome with his wife and maybe several mistresses as fast as he can go. And that may be the end of that, but it's not the end of that, because there's more money where that came from, and that some generals are willing to come over to the CIA side. There's pro-Shah ayatollahs that will come along. The upper class is scared to death, so they're willing to put up with a loss of independence. You pay for religious demonstrations. The CIA hires infiltrators to go into the leftist party and stage destruction of marketplaces, vandalizing marketplaces. It's them doing it, not the leftist crowd. The same thing is done with another set of infiltrators. And at last, the CIA hires the 2 biggest gangsters in Tehran. And so it works. You can do it. It's been done over and over. It's been done a lot of times. So it's not that hard to do if you got enough money to do it, enough will to do it. And most of that is gone. The Shah wants to have him killed, hung. He will die in his bed. He's a destroyed man in many ways. Who knows what the world will be like if the United States and Britain had been willing to just suck it up and say, it's their oil. They got to. That's what happens these days, and we can't do anything about it. We now know we can't do it, and the world knows we can't do it, which has been, at Frankopan's point, through much of the, well, the last half of the book. The emperor's got no clothes. What does the U.S. expect after having helped pull this off? Well, going to get a share of the Iranian oil. The Shah will do a bunch of modernization projects. We push him to do that. Some of them are quite good. The universities get to be good. They're pretty secular. Women are given more rights. The U.S. has always got a place to operate from in Iran in case things change. A guy named Schwarzkopf is appointed to create Savak. Savak, of course, is the spy network that will be so hated by the crowds by the time they get to 79 because they're brutal. They torture, they rape, they do all the stuff that they're trained to do. I mean, they're trained not just by us, but by others that know how to do it, to intimidate people and scare the shit out of people. So you know, you can't play both sides of that game and have credibility forever. And the credibility, so his argument's going. I want to do just a little bit more because it's not in the book because Frankopan is and stuff most of you know, but a few details that maybe you did or didn't know. I mean, there they are, the Dulles brothers. One Secretary of State, one CIA. One of them, one of the two, I think it's Secretary of State's got an airport named after the other airport in D.C. is named after Reagan. Good God. So what's this successful CIA operation? Where is this going? This is a year later in Guatemala. And in Guatemala. I think you know this pretty well. And by the time you get to the 50s, 2%, well, you don't know the details, but it's a general sketch. 2% of the Guatemalan population owns 75% of the land. The United Fruit Company owns nearly half. The United Fruit Company is not just a banana company. They own the railroads, they own the telephone system, they own the telegraph system. Exactly like was the case in Cuba under Batista, the Castro will overthrow. So the U.S. is doing, at least the United Fruit Company stockholders are doing really, really well in Guatemala. And you got the same thing going on in Nicaragua with Sandinistas. And this guy is elected president because he's the only candidate. So in 31, he's a pretty awful son of a bitch. But the Guatemalans, to their credit, will organize middle-class professionals, teachers, junior officers, the lieutenants, to try and get rid of this guy, and they are successful. They are particularly motivated when a school teacher is killed in one of these peaceful demonstrations in Guatemala City in June of 44, and by July of 44, this guy is gone. And he will end up in Paris. He ends up in country of a notorious place for retired dictators and will live there. Like at the very end, it's only a couple army generals and the U.S. ambassador that stay loyal to him, but he's gone. Guatemala has elections. First, you get elected this guy, Arevalo, who does the accomplishes some things. The second guy that's elected in 51 is a guy named Marvin, who is enamored of what he has studied having happened in Costa Rica. And Costa Rica, of course, is set up as this model Central American country. Why can't the others be like Costa Rica? When did Costa Rica get that? Well, in 48 and 49, under this provisional president, Hugueres, who in his 18 days of provisional presidency, he'll be president off and on several times in Costa Rica. He abolishes the army. Because I read about this from H.G. Wells. He said this is the problem. The army, they produce coups. We'll have a police force, but we're not going to have an army. They still don't have one, and they have never been invaded. Vote given to women, to the illiterate, public education for all, citizenship for black, welfare legislation, nationalizes the banks, outlaws the Communist Party, gets a new constitution. Does not do land reform. But what it does do is say to the nationalized banks, now you grant interest-free loans to the poor to buy land. And over time, up to today, Costa Rica, because it is a Latin American, I mean, a Central American country with global warming problems and so forth, is considered this great model. That, that that's what Arbenz wants to do. Let's be like Costa Rica. So the problem he's got is that almost half of the land that he wants to redistribute, and he's going to redistribute land, which is a little different. It is different, fair enough. Is owned by the United Fruit Company. So he's this land reform, redistribute lands. It's land that's not under cultivation. It's owned by others, but it's not under cultivation. Create a literate middle class. He is very clearly anti-communist, as was Castro when he first showed up in New York and asked for help from the U.S. But he was open to communist help if the U.S. didn't respond. He even said, if we're going to confiscate this uncultivated land, we will pay the owners a fair price. And we know what they consider the fair price because we have their tax records. What they claim to be the fair price when they're paying taxes on that land. And he's going to grant low interest loans for loans to buy land. But he's going to confiscate an awful lot of United Fruit Company land because most of it's not under cultivation. They say, we will pay you what you claim to be the value of that land, 1.2 million. It was worth a whole hell of a lot more than that. It's worth 16. Well, that's not what your tax records say. And it said, no, we're not paying any more than that. And so the Dulles brothers said, well, we got to get rid of this. These are not neutral people. John Foster Dulles had worked for the United Fruit Company. He'd arranged the deal with the United Fruit Company and Guatemala officials back in the corrupt 30s. Now he is Secretary of State. His brother is a CIA director who sat on the board of directors of the United Fruit Company. Henry Cabot Lodge, the United Nations ambassador to the UN, owns lots of United Fruit Company stock. Ed Whitman, who is the PR man, is married to Eisenhower's personal secretary. Whitman produces this movie, which you can Google on YouTube and watch. You may say, as I said to myself, I've seen stuff like this in elementary school. These are film strips we watched when we come down to the auditorium. And I don't think I saw this one, but I've seen stuff just like this. And that was the way we were raised. So, and the United Fruit Company pays for Times and Christian Science Monitor to go down and say, what a great job we're doing here. Look at how we've got schools and they're clean and yada, yada, yada. And so off it goes. The CIA picks the guy who's going to be the next leader. He's trained in Nicaragua by this slime ball. Most of who will finally be thrown out. Not to say that Daniel Ortega is a great guy, no, either. But you go down, you get into boxed in circles. And God knows what you do. So in come the CIA planes, and our Armas is arrested and thrown out. The United States will recognize the country immediately. Armas gets popular for foreign aid. Most of the people that run the Guatemala for the rest of the time, and still today, are trained at the School of America, the School of Americas, which still exists. Founded in Panama Canal Zone in '46. They try and teach these. They're going to teach guys like Sabat, exactly guys. This is what you do to make sure that your population doesn't go communist. It's called counter insurgency, basically torture and rape and this and that kind of stuff, so that people are scared to death. And it's easy to do to the Mayans and the other Native Americans because the rich people don't like them anyway. Panama, School of Americans was kicked out of Panama in '84 when Jimmy Carter gets Panama back. It moves to Fort Benning, Georgia. It's still there. It's no longer called the School of America. It's now called the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Operations. 60,000 counterinsurgency. The laundry list of people that have done horrible things in their countries, including the disappearance in Argentina, were all trained by the school. And how can you do this and have any credibility for being a promoter of democracy? There's almost a 40-year civil war in Guatemala, which is only recently over and there's kind of a peace, but it's kind of too late in a way because now global warming has taken over and the Guatemalans can't raise coffee because it's too warm, and so they walk through Mexico and then come to the border, and the whole story. It's really quite ugly. It's terrible. So Frank Van wants to point out that if that's the West position in the world, it won't take long before the world catches on that these are not sincere people. They're not. Not everyone that's way. And so I'll go back to what Martin Luther King says, and God knows, someday one would think this is supposed to happen. Human beings are loyal to mankind as a whole, not to just their tribe, race, class, nation. Martin Luther King. This is his anti-Vietnam speech in Riverside Church in 1967, April of 1967, April of 1968. He's killed in Memphis. And of course, we pretend that we think Martin Luther King is a great leader, and we have the holidays and stuff. But we don't pretend. I think a lot of people believe that. But if you really believe it, this is the kind of stuff he's saying. And in theory, this is what's said in every Christian pulpit across the planet, or across Christianity and Islam. This is what the theory that was supposed to be all about. That mankind, but in fact, we all know it becomes tribal real fast. So I don't know. I left your little meeting yesterday. I'm going to go back. And I went back. Janet, I don't know that I share this. I think I shared with Janet. Our train ride in Morocco from Casablanca to Rabat. We were only on the train, and we got at the sign season. I was sitting next to a Moroccan. It became obviously in 10 minutes the guy spoke English, good English. Chat about this and that. I don't know what the motivation was, but we were talking about Morocco's future or something. I said, sometimes you just think that humanity's not really doing a whole good job. He went further, and he turned and tears came to his eyes. And so be it. Morocco's doing pretty well in some ways. So they sort of like the king. Well, we were hearing that from the guy that promoted that line, but even so, as an example, I mean, if you ever see our slides, as an example, we were told, girls no longer have to put up with it. I mean, the president said, and he's a president, but there's no election. He's Muhammad VI, I suppose. His son will be the next president. King. I said, what am I saying, President King? Sorry, thank you. He said, women, there's no more arranged marriage they have to put up with. If they don't want the arranged marriage, they have the right to go to court. And the court is run by women. And the women will listen to their objection to arranged marriage, and it's all. Furthermore, anytime there is an arranged marriage, it's required by Morocco. So the woman involved has got to go see a counselor, this female, and she sits privately with this woman. And if this counselor feels that there's, even though she's consented and is not complaining about the arranged marriage, feels that it's not a good idea, she will, the counselor will say, I recommend this be annulled. Or she may say, there's nothing wrong with this. The woman's not objecting, but she's too young. But the marriage has got to be postponed for 2 years. And we say, well, how the heck? This is an Islamic country. How the heck did this king get that as all the, they're not mullahs because it's Sunni, the clerics, but the imams. He said it took a long time. They worked on it, and they worked on it, and they worked on it. And they said, I cannot just announce it. They've got to buy into it. And he said, but we were sort of aware of this going on, and this guy was a PhD student in engineering, so it's not the guy that I got. He just recently dropped out of his PhD program because he liked it important better or whatever. So he was not on it. He said it just takes a long time. Why does that not happen in our democratic system? Because it can't. You got elections every 2 years. You got frothing back and forth. You got, or maybe it did happen in a certain period of time, but it's not happening anymore. This notion that you sit down and say, yeah, I've shared this with before. You've heard it, so, but here he goes again. It doesn't matter who the name. There was a journalist that was he's probably dead. I should go home and check him out. Wise guy. He said, Watergate happened, and supposedly all this good, this reform came out of it. He said, openness is good. We should have clean air, and everybody should see what's going on. That's an ethic that we have. Transparency. We preach that as if this is really. Before all this openness, the congressional hearings open at TV, and you can read the transcript. It was a closed hearing, and that's why those people were called lobbyists, because they had to sit in the lobby outside the locked door, and they could not get into the closed hearings, where what could go on in the closed hearing. And what's his name? Miranda's got a pretty good song about that. The room we're happy. What can happen in a closed door without the light of day, and no one? You can make deals and not then be pilloried by by the person that wants to defeat you for the senatorship or the congressionalship or whatever the hell back home, because you compromised on your so-called principles by striking a deal. What's the only way this thing with Manchin happened? Of course, we don't have legislation. No one knew about it. Everyone, even the guy that's closest to Manchin or to Biden, who was working, said, "I had no idea this was happening." He said, "It happened." It was closed door. So there were deals back there. We never see the light of day. Of course, people get bitch and moan. It's hard to do, because as soon as you make the deal, then you have sold out your constituents. And the more radical, the more rightist, or the more leftist, Newt Gingrich created a monster. We're stuck. Hillary, but there is a problem with democracy, at least democracy that works this way. Whereas in Britain, as you're well aware, there's a pretty there's a secrecy act with the cabinet needs. Anyone breaks the secret with the cabinet needs. The way the British system works, the cabinet says these are the general principles for what we'd like to happen in Britain. We're not that smart about education, because we're just a bunch of goddamn lawyers sitting in here. We will send these general principles to what's the Whitehall, to our bureaucracy, to our education bureaucracy, our nuclear power bureaucracy, or whatever, and they will come back with proposals. And we will look at those proposals and say, not good enough yet. We can't sell that. I know it's the best you can do, and it's probably the best deal for Britain, but we cannot sell that to Parliament. There's going to be a vote of no confidence. So revise it, bring it back, and only when a deal is the civil service has worked out a deal that the cabinet can then stand by, does it get presented for its first reading to Parliament. It's a done deal. Almost always a done deal, because the cabinet's going back and forth with its constituents, and it's not always the case. Because the press gets involved, and but most of the time it's worked out in a deal like that. We don't have anything. or we did in closed committees and, but now, where you say, do not, what does the Supreme Court say? There should be president and his advisors cannot create policy. This was not on abortion, this is on EPA. The only thing that's correct, the only thing that's constitutionally legal is if Congress passes it. Well, Congress knows diddly squat about global warming. It knows nothing about nuclear power. There's a bunch of goddamn lawyers and politicians and guys that came from God. There may be some very smart people, but they're not experts. It's not constitutional. The only thing that's constitutional is that it's backed by the elected officials of the common man, and you're taking away power from the common man, and the response to that is, thank goodness. You want the common man to devise your water policies and your nuclear energy policies and your transportation policies and so forth and so forth. I mean, you want a plan that is going to be to the benefit of the greatest majority of people possibly can. But good luck with 50 senators on one side and 50 senators on the other side coming up with a plan which is equally beneficial to everybody. That just isn't happening. Or if it does, the lobbyists, or we go to lobbyists and say, lobbyists write this legislation, and we will get it passed. And we owe you because you got us elected with your money, your taxes. Whereas the British election system, this very well better than I may get it wrong. So you get 6 weeks to run an election. You have the only money you can spend is money that is given to you by the taxpayer. The last week of elections, you can't run any TV ads and stuff like that. We got citizens. Yeah, which is a complete. I mean, so democracy can function pretty darn well if you're willing to say, you're going to have to let the experts do most of the planning, and if they're corrupt, and self-serving, like it is perceived EU bureaucrats are, you've got the right to vote them out. But the idea that the common man should be making policy through his elected Chamber of Commerce guy that just got elected because he's got the support of Joe Blow in his local district, and he sold a lot of houses. He's going to make policy. So but we're not alone. I mean, the policies that are necessary for this kind of behavior are daunting, and so one sort of almost hopes for World War III to wake up common man and say, "You want to go through this again? This just about destroyed the planet. You want to try this again, or you just like you were in 1945, and you were and you were after the 30 years, but you weren't after World War One, to work together to work things out and give everyone some benefits and have compromise and realize that it cannot be a zero-sum game. You've got to create policies in which competition is good, but the competition cannot be to the death. So one tribe wins, and we won because we're better. So we get to do. Why are German stocks always undervalued? This is standard stuff. German stocks, which are among the best in the world, German companies among the world. Now, whether they are these days or not, and whether they're going to do what they're going to do in the next several years without enough energy in the winter from Russia, God knows what. But they are valuable companies. They're highly valued for their skills, their work, craftsmanship, and so forth. But they're always lower than market value when you buy stock in lower market value. I mean, this is what the average guru in Wall Street Journal would estimate the stock is worth, and it sells at lower value. Why is that? Because German law says you have to negotiate with your employees. You know, they have to be part of the decision that the corporation makes. They have to be on the board, and they have to be, they can't be 3 representatives. They have to be close to majority. And so you get a situation where the companies have to take care of its workers better than more cutthroat places, and so the stock isn't worth it. But you go back to, how did Costa Rica pull it off? It's clear how they pulled it off. The history is very obvious. When we were in Costa Rica, we were reading guidebooks, and every guidebook is the same damn thing, because they're probably all talking the same stuff off the internet or whatever. It happened in 48. And why did the CIA in 48 and 49 not do anything about this stuff in Costa Rica, which sounded rather left? Because the CIA had just been invented and was not up to snuff that year. And I guess to some degree because there was no United Fruit Company in Costa Rica, because this soil is nowhere near its root.
And one more thing, single payer.
Yeah.
Single payer for him.
Yeah. Their life expectancy is as high as the U.S.
They have a whole.
Yeah. The roads, not so good. Actually, the roads are good. The problem is there's only 2 lanes. Yeah. Well, it's time to go. Well, you can't afford to, but the task is daunting. On the other, and so we'll see if, for example, Joe Biden cares enough to not run again. My opinion. Yeah, no, I hope it's not, because. But he should announce early enough so that you don't want to have the Lyndon Johnson situation, where Hewitt Humphrey could have won that election. He came very close to winning the 68 election. He just didn't have enough time. And Johnson announced his "I will not run again" in March, and that was no near enough time. I mean, if you look at the electoral college results, of course, they're so skewed because of the way the electoral college is added up. But if you look at the closeness of enough states that would have given Humphrey the election rather than Nixon, it was real. It was razor thin. He'd had 2 more months, he probably would have got. Now, whether Hewitt Humphrey was the greatest, it wouldn't have been Nixon. And maybe that's bad, because Nixon, compared to Trump, Watergate was like stealing a pack of gum. Good Lord. It hits him. But he also was the author of the Southern Strategy. The Southern Strategy. When Lyndon Johnson signed civil rights legislation saying segregation can't happen. Schools got to be integrated and so forth. He turns to his aide and says, I think I gave the South to the Republic. And Nixon was watching at the time saying, 1, I think I got a chance to be president in 68. And 2, this is how I win. I win the South by playing racial politics. And that exact thing happened. So the solid Democratic South became solid Republican South in no time flat, and still is. Although Georgia, has Georgia had its Republican primary? Oh no. No, it's not Georgia I'm thinking of. It's somewhere else. Whatever. Yeah, Herschel Walker. Good Lord. I mean, good God. Whatever. To the historian's credit, the lessons are there to learn, if only we did a little bit more learning, I suppose.